Listen carefully. Lower your volume. What I'm about to say was never meant to be spoken out loud. 8 seconds is all it takes for a life to split in two, and once you hear this, you won't be able to unhear it. Somewhere, right now, a file with your name on it exists. You didn't sign it. You didn't agree to it. But it's already shaping the path in front of you. Most men go their entire lives believing terror comes from chaos, random violence, madness, bad luck. That's comforting. Because chaos has no architect. But what if the most terrifying stories are not accidents at all? What if they are systems doing exactly what they were designed to do? Tonight, we're not starting 2026 with jump scares or cheap horror. We're opening with 3 true stories that expose something older, quieter, more disciplined. Stories where revenge isn't loud, it's procedural, institutional, buried under paperwork, authority, and smiles. The first truth you must accept is this: power doesn't need to threaten you. It just needs you to trust the wrong structure. In ancient civilizations, revenge was never personal. It was bureaucratic. If a man broke the law in Babylon, punishment didn't come from anger, it came from tablets, seals, witnesses. The system itself carried out vengeance cleanly and personally. That model never died. It evolved. Universities, corporations, governments, they are not neutral. They are memory machines. They remember who disobeys, who sees too much, who steps out of alignment. The stories you're about to hear didn't begin with violence. They began with credentials, titles, access, a teaching assistant, a boyfriend, a locked front door. Harmless things. That's always how it starts. Predators don't kick down gates. They inherit keys. Here's the part most men miss. Revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about reminding you of your place. Making sure you understand that privacy is conditional, safety is temporary, and authority is watching even when it claims to be absent. I'm not telling you this to scare you. Fear is useless. I'm telling you because once you recognize the pattern, you stop being prey. You stop assuming the world is disorganized. You begin to see the geometry beneath the chaos. These stories are true, documented, verified, and still most people who hear them miss the point entirely. They ask, how could this happen? Instead of asking the only question that matters, what system allowed this to happen quietly? Stay with me. We're going deeper. The first story doesn't announce itself as horror. It wears the mask of progress, education, merit. A place where young minds are told they are safe because knowledge is sacred. But every institution has shadows where rules bend for those who understand leverage. Picture a closed seminar room in the Northeast. 25 students. Soft voices. Polite debate. On the surface, nothing dangerous. But power rarely enters loudly, it waits. It observes, it selects. The man at the center of this wasn't a professor. That's important. He was something more effective, a gatekeeper in training. Close enough to authority to borrow its weight. Far enough from scrutiny to act without consequence. At least that's what he believed. History is full of men like this. In Rome, they were clerks. In medieval courts, scribes. Today, they are assistants, analysts, moderators. People who don't make the rules, but decide how they're applied. The system taught him patience. Reward compliance, punish silence, identify the diligent, the ambitious, the ones who need approval to move forward. That's not predation by instinct, it's predation by design. A student excels. She speaks when others don't. She participates. The system flags her as valuable, and value attracts attention. Not admiration, interest. There's a difference. Admiration respects distance. Interest seeks access. Notice how control never begins with force. It begins with validation. Agreement in the margins. Extra eye contact. Follow-up questions framed as mentorship. This is psychological softening anti-tactic. Same one cult leaders use. Same one intelligence agencies refine. You elevate the target's sense of being seen, then quietly redefine what seen means. Now introduce a second figure. The intermediary. The smiling accomplice. In every revenge system, there is always a courier, someone close enough to the victim to normalize the abnormal. History calls them informants. Modern language calls them boyfriends, friends, allies. This is where the story stops being about one man's sickness and starts being about structure. Because what happened next required coordination, payment, secrecy, continuity. This wasn't impulse, it was supply and demand. Ask yourself this, and don't answer too quickly: how many similar exchanges happen every day without ever being discovered? How many systems quietly reward the conversion of intimacy into currency? When exposure finally comes, the system reacts the way systems always do. It sacrifices pieces to preserve the board. One expelled, one fired. Public statements, procedural remorse. But the architecture remains intact. Here's the lesson they don't teach you: revenge isn't always carried out by the victim. Sometimes the system avenges itself against anyone who disrupts its quiet efficiency. And once you understand that, you start seeing it everywhere. The second story begins where most men feel safest: home. Isolation. Familiar walls. The belief that danger only comes from outside and that a locked door is a boundary the world respects. That belief is a lie we inherit early because without it sleep becomes impossible. A house in the forest snow. Distance. No neighbors close enough to hear a scream. Civilization thins out in places like this, and when it does, something ancient fills the gap. Not chaos, opportunity. Here's what matters: the house walls wasn't broken into. No shattered glass, no forced entry. The system worked, or at least it appeared to. Every window locked, every door secure. The police concluded what systems always conclude: when evidence threatens their assumptions, user error. You must have forgotten. Case closed. But let's slow down. Two figures stood over a sleeping man with a knife. That detail alone dismantles the robbery narrative. Thieves steal, predators linger. Execution requires proximity, timing, and rehearsal. This is where most people retreat into superstition or denial. They imagine random psychopaths, drifters, wrong place, wrong time. But randomness doesn't coordinate silence. Randomness doesn't move in pairs, scatter strategically, or exit without a trace. What you're hearing is the sound of a test. Throughout history, power structures have conducted silent evaluations. Medieval guilds did it. Secret societies perfected it. Intelligence agencies still do. You observe a subject in their most vulnerable state and measure response time, awareness, panic threshold. Will they freeze? Will they fight? Will they comply? Notice what was left behind. A knife not taken, not used, left. Symbols matter to systems like this. The message wasn't violence. It was capability. We were here. We could have ended you. Sleep differently now. And then comes the second layer of control: gaslighting by authority. The officer doesn't investigate further. He reframes reality. You must be mistaken. There is no evidence. Accept the official version. Move on. This is how psychological containment works. You don't need to silence a man if you can make him doubt himself. Once doubt is installed, the system withdraws. The subject polices his own mind. Ask yourself something uncomfortable: how many people carry moments like this? Events that never made sense, but were trained to dismiss them because no institution validated the threat. Revenge doesn't always come from someone you wronged. Sometimes it comes from something you never knew you disrupted. A boundary crossed. A sightline noticed. A coincidence that wasn't supposed to happen. And the most terrifying part: you're not meant to understand why. You're only meant to remember how powerless you felt in that moment of waking, because fear remembered is obedience delayed. We're not done. The final descent is closer than you think. The third story doesn't arrive with violence. It arrives with persistence. That's how modern revenge prefers to operate. Not as an event, but as an atmosphere. Something that seeps into your routines until you no longer remember what calm felt like. After a breakup, a woman begins noticing patterns. Messages that shouldn't exist. Appearances that are too well timed. A sense of being tracked without evidence strong enough to prove it. This is where most men lose interest because there's no monster yet. No knife, no intruder, just discomfort. That's the trap. In ancient warfare, the most effective sieges weren't the ones that breached walls. They were the ones that starved the city. Slowly, quietly. No dramatic battles, just erosion. Morale collapses before defenses ever do. Psychological revenge works the same way. The X doesn't threaten, he doesn't confront, he doesn't even need to be present. He simply refuses to disappear. And refusal, when sustained long enough, becomes domination. Every unexplained sound, every notification, every coincidence begins to orbit the same question: am I safe? Here's what's rarely discussed: stalking isn't about obsession. Obsession is chaotic. Stalking is disciplined. It requires restraint, timing, control of impulse. That alone tells you something darker is at play. And when institutions get involved, police reports, restraining orders, digital logs, the system reveals its blind spot. It only recognizes harm once it's visible. Bruises, break-ins, bodies. Until then, it treats fear as a personal problem, not a structural one. This is how revenge hides in plain sight. By operating just below the threshold of action. Close enough to be felt, far enough to be denied. Across history, marginalized threats were dismissed the same way. Early warnings ignored because they lacked spectacle. Cassandra was cursed not because she lied, but because her truths were inconvenient. Systems don't fear falsehood. They fear disruption. Eventually, the victim begins altering her behavior. Roads change. Sleep patterns fracture. Social circles shrink. This is the real objective. Not punishment, but contraction. Making a life smaller without ever touching it. And the most dangerous moment comes when the victim asks herself, maybe I'm overreacting. That sentence marks the transfer of control. The system no longer needs to act. It has installed itself internally. Understand this clearly: revenge isn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes it's about proving you can reach them without consequence. 3 stories, 3 environments: education,
home, intimacy.
Different settings, same architecture. The descent continues because now you've seen the pattern, and once seen, it doesn't let you go. This is the midpoint. And before we go any further, you need to understand something important. Once a man reaches this layer of awareness, he is no longer a passive observer. He becomes implicated, not because he acted, but because he now sees. Every system we've touched so far shares one hidden rule: exposure is tolerated only until it spreads. That's why truth is always fragmented into stories, isolated incidents, anecdotes, never patterns. Patterns threaten architecture. Up to now, you may still be telling yourself these are extreme cases, outliers, bad people slipping through cracks. That thought is the final defense of a comfortable mind, because the moment you accept that these events are not anomalies, but functions, you must ask what role you're meant to play. Let me pull the curtain back further. In psychological warfare manuals, there's a concept called identity destabilization. You don't break a person by attacking their body. You break them by eroding their certainty about who they are and how the world works. Once identity softens, control installs easily. That's what all three stories have in common. Not fear, but reprogramming. The student learns her success made her visible. The son learns his home is conditional. The woman learns her independence can be followed. Different lessons. Same outcome. Vigilance replaces innocence. Now here's where this stops being just information and starts becoming initiation. Algorithms, yes, the same ones distributing this video, are not neutral either. They don't reward truth. They reward signal, repetition, commitment, identity markers. This is why symbols have always mattered more than statements. Symbols bypass logic and bind the subconscious. So I'm going to ask you to do something deliberate. If you understand that power operates quietly, if you recognize that awareness is the first act of resistance, if you are willing to stop being anesthetized by coincidence, then comment the phrase, "I see the pattern," and then comment it again. Exactly the same. Twice, not for me, for you. Repetition locks identity. Ancient mystery schools knew this. Modern platforms measure it. When you repeat a symbol publicly, you declare alignment, first to yourself, then to the system watching you. Now listen closely. From this point forward, the descent accelerates. The stories stop being external. They start mapping onto your own memories. Moments you dismissed. Interactions that felt off. Doors that were supposedly locked. That's not paranoia, that's integration. Revenge at its highest level is not retaliation. It's revelation. It's forcing someone to live in a world they can no longer misunderstand. And once that threshold is crossed, there is no going back to sleep. We're past the warning signs now. What comes next is why these systems exist at all. Here is the final truth, and it's the one most men sense but are never given language for. These systems exist because they work. Not because they are evil in some cartoon sense, but because they are efficient at one thing: maintaining hierarchy without open violence. Open violence creates martyrs. Silence creates compliance. Revenge at the highest level is not emotional. It is corrective. It corrects deviation, curiosity, independence, visibility without permission. When someone drifts too far outside their assigned lane, the system doesn't rush in, it nudges, tests, observes, and only escalates if necessary. That's why the most terrifying stories don't end cleanly. No neat justice, no final safety. Just lingering uncertainty, a parked car, an unanswered question, a sense that something learned your name and never forgot it. In ancient mystery traditions, there was a warning given to initiates at the final gate. You will never again be alone in your thoughts. Not because someone is always watching, but because once awareness is activated, perception changes permanently. You begin noticing leverage points, behavioral patterns, repeated outcomes disguised as chance. This is why most people reject this level of truth, not because it's false, but because it carries responsibility. Once you see systems, you can no longer blame randomness. You must move differently. Speak carefully. Choose battles with precision. And here's the part that turns fear into power. Systems rely on predictability, on people who repeat habits unconsciously, on men who believe danger only looks like danger. The moment you stop being predictable, mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, you become expensive to control. Not untouchable, but costly. That is the quiet revenge of awareness. You don't rage against the machine. You outgrow the need to be processed by it. You develop internal sovereignty. You stop oversharing. Stop assuming. Stop seeking validation from structures that benefit from your exposure. The terrifying part of these stories was never the knife, the photos, or the shadow outside the window. It was the realization that authority did not protect, that intimacy could be weaponized, that silence was strategic. And yet, you're still here. Listen, integrating, which means the system failed to keep you asleep. That's how 2026 really begins, not with chaos, but with clarity. And clarity, once achieved, is irreversible.